Hello. So, our names are Jérôme and Jessica. We are from Family Source Consultants. We are international client relation managers. I'm based in France, and my colleague Jessica is based in the UK.
We work together with intended parents from all over the world who wish to do a surrogacy journey in the US.
Our guests today are Dr. Daneshmand and Westoby from San Diego Fertility Center. San Diego Fertility Center is a recognized fertility center in California with more than 70 years of collective experience, diagnosis, and treating infertility. Thank you for taking part of this panel today to share your expertise. We should like to start by learning more about this wonderful panel. We will start with Dr. Daneshmand. Dr. Daneshmand, could you please tell us a little bit more about what you do and your areas of expertise?
Sounds good. Would you want me to speak in English or French or both? Or
we can speak in English, and if some people would like that we speak in French, it's possible. We can.
And mix and match. Absolutely. It really is a pleasure to be among you tonight. As you know, San Diego Fertility Center, myself, Richard Westoby, we have been guiding and supporting intended parents in their journeys to create their family. I myself have been a doctor now, a fertility specialist now for the past 22 and a half years. I did my training at the University of California in Los Angeles. And really, during the past 22 years, have had the honor of accompanying many, many intended parents, many patients in their journeys to creating their families. That's been really the greatest honor of my life. I've been blessed to be able to have the opportunity to do that. The bonds that have been created with intended parents, with their children that grow very, very quickly, is truly inspirational for me, and it's really the driving force in my life. I've also been involved and have published many papers in the field of in vitro fertilization. We've made some great strides and contributions to the field of in vitro. We've published papers on endometrial receptivity. How do we make the uterus more receptive so that when we transfer the embryo, it has a higher chance of implantation and pregnancy and a healthy delivery. We published papers on the classification of embryos based on cell structure, quality of the cells. How do we determine among a group of embryos which one to transfer? Genetic analysis of embryos. We were the first to compare fresh versus frozen embryo transfers in a randomized controlled setting. And currently I'm one of the principal investigators in a global study, which includes European clinics, US clinics, Middle Eastern clinics, looking at non-invasive chromosome testing of embryos. Instead of performing a biopsy on the embryo, analyzing the culture media and the DNA that the embryo sheds into the culture media. So we feel that without research, we don't make the strides and we don't make the progress that we have made. And there's been tremendous progress. And we also make the process healthier for our intended parents, for our egg donors, and for our surrogates. So really an honor to be among you tonight and to be able to share some of our stories and also share the information with you as well.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Your work is absolutely fascinating. So Richard, if you could introduce yourself as well, tell us a little bit more about what you do and what your areas of expertise are, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So unlike Dr. Daneshmand, who is, as you can tell, very accomplished, but if you look behind him, look at all of those certificates. It's amazing. I think one even comes from Starbucks. I have a mirror, right? So I have a mirror. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a dad. I have boy-girl twins born through surrogacy in the United States. And my role at San Diego Fertility Center is to help all of our intended parents to navigate the process. Because when we went through this, it was very much I don't know what I'm supposed to know, and I need someone to help guide me and what decisions should I be taking and when. And so that's my role at the clinic. I'm based in London, so I look after all of our European clients. Je parle français, hablo español, blah, blah, all these different bits and pieces. When I'm drunk, I speak great German, Greek, Danish, you name it. But yeah, realistically, a lot of what I do is the logistics around working with SDFC.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your introductions. There is so much to talk about, but today we would like to focus on providing information to those intended parents who live overseas and are considering the United States for their egg donation and surrogacy journeys. As you know, at this time, there is much uncertainty of how to carry out a process with travel, bans, quarantines, vaccinations, and question about the safety of the pregnancy and baby during COVID. So we would like to discuss this topic more at length with both of you. So we have some question, and Jessica, yeah, it's up to you.
So I was just going to say we have some questions that we've kind of thought up of, but if anybody who's watching this has their own questions, there's an opportunity for you to ask while we're doing that. So please feel free to type in your questions, and we'll read them when we're able to. But hopefully we'll get to everybody. So I guess the first question is for you, Dr. Daneshmand. A really common question that we're getting at the moment is, it's kind of the basics. Is it safe to be doing IVF now or to become pregnant during the COVID pandemic?
I think it's safe if you have adapted your protocols, if you're aware of the latest research studies on COVID-19 and pregnancy, if you're updated on potentially the vaccines that are now currently available. Yes, it's absolutely safe. What we have done is we have followed the guidelines of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. And whilst we took a pause in April of 2020, in the latter part of March of 2020, in our IVF operations, we resumed in May. And since then, since actually the beginning of April, we've really adapted all our protocols here in the office, in the lab, in order to protect our patients, protect our intended parents, protect our surrogates and our egg donors who've gone through this journey to creating families. So that it's everything from having a face mask, N95 face masks, to having face shields, to frequent hand washing, to sanitizing all the surfaces in the clinic, to distancing appointments for patients. And also one of the other most important factors that we have just recently started and will complete by mid-February is that the entire team here at San Diego Fertility Center would be completing their second dose of vaccination by February 15th of next month. That helps protect our patients. The team is also protected, and really the vaccinations are the way out to shatter really this pandemic. So I believe that if you adhere to all the guidelines, the CDC guidelines, if you're aware of the latest research studies, which are really reassuring as it relates to COVID-19 and pregnancy, then yes, absolutely. In fact, we have seen a surge in the number of patients, the number of intended parents who want to have families. I think that sometimes the periods of stress and periods of this pandemic make us think about some of the things that are important, to make us reconnect with close family members, and that desire really burns within us to have families, to have children. I myself, being a father of 3 children, 3 daughters, have had more time to spend with them during this pandemic, because typically I, travel with Richard to many places in this world, including actually Europe, a few times a year, to meet intended parents directly, to meet the children who grow up very quickly. And that hasn't been the case. So a little bit more time with family this year. And really, I think that we've seen that desire for intended parents to continue their journeys and really their dream of parenthood continues. And for many patients, we can't afford to wait, because as time progresses, as you know, both the number and the quality of the eggs in the ovaries decline. And so for many of our patients who are using their own eggs, in order to go through the journey. Time is of the essence. So I think intended parents, patients, surrogates, egg donors should feel very comfortable and confident that their health will be protected as we take care of them, through this the fertility journey here at San Diego Fertility Center.
Okay, thank you. Our second question will be for Richard. Richard, as an international representative, could you please tell us, tell us about the logistic of carrying out an egg donor or surrogacy process in the United States without having to travel?
Absolutely. And in fact, somebody's just posted in the Q&A, is it possible to ship sperm and or embryos from Europe to the US? The answer is absolutely. There is a process that we need to go through. And back in March, when the world kind of stopped, the fertility world all over, every single country was just like pause. We put in place a mechanism whereby the clinics that we partnered with over the past few years facilitated for our clients sperm freezing and also creation of embryos and shipping of that to the United States. Right now, it's a bit of an involved process, and I normally explain it in two parts. The Food and Drug Administration and the CDC are two bodies that work very closely with IVF clinics in the United States. And the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, are the ones that basically allow us to do embryo transfers into a surrogate. So if I have a client, for example, in London, that client can go to a clinic in London, they can freeze their sperm. You can do that in any country. But what we need is, on the same time that is being done, we need blood and urine to be sent to the United States for testing. And it needs to be run and tested within a time frame. Okay, that time frame differs. If it's sperm, it's 7 days before or after. Or if it's eggs, it's 30 days. So what we've done is we have a mechanism why we work with about 10 different clinics around Europe, where a client, if it's a sperm provider, can go in, they freeze their sperm, the blood and the urine is shipped to the United States for testing. We make sure that there are no STDs, so sexually transmitted diseases. The FDA approves it. That sperm can then be shipped from that country to the United States. So we're doing that literally. We've done over 250 of them. We did to the end of last year, we did about 272. And it's just going, right? Same process with eggs. With embryos, it's a slightly different process. So if you're a heterosexual couple who've created embryos for use in yourself, and you haven't done the FDA testing, your window, in theory, has gone, because you had a 7-day window for sperm and a 30-day window for eggs when you were doing the testing. But if you created it for use in yourself as a heterosexual couple, there is a loophole that we can get through with the FDA's approval that we can then do retrospective testing. So the woman and the man would then do testing, and then, assuming it's approved, we could then ship those embryos again to the United States. Now, it does depend on certain countries how it's shipped. You can ship by FedEx. I know it sounds weird, but you've got literally it goes on an airplane, a FedEx plane, and it's shipped by FedEx, or it's hand carried. You have somebody who literally goes to a clinic, picks up vials of sperm or the embryos, puts them into a big container, a suitcase container that's at minus 196. It's freezing, and they carry that by hand onto a plane and bring it from one clinic to our clinic. So it is a process that's working. Obviously, it's not without its risks. What if the tank starts to leak? What if, there's a whole variety of what ifs. Touch wood, we've not had any of that, because we work with professionals, right? There are specific companies that do this. It's not like it's just me carrying a tank because I can get into America. As the travel ban changes, as the permutations are coming on board, what we found is that some people, so the travel ban as it stands is China, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, not allowed in the States. Schengen, not allowed in the United States, right? If you've been in those countries for 14 days before your arrival, You're not allowed in. However, we have people who are deciding that they want to come to the clinic, they want to meet the clinic, they want to go through the protocols at the clinic. They're flying from London to Mexico. They're quarantining, in effect, in Mexico for 2 weeks, and then flying into the US, because you can get in from Mexico to the US as long as you have a valid ESTA. So again, assuming you can take a lot of time off work, or you can work from home or whatever, there are ways and means to either get into the United States, or you can ship your sperm, eggs, embryos across border.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that incredibly thorough answer. Oh, sorry, Dr. Daneshmand, do you have?
I was going to say, and exactly right. And one other permutation with this is that for some of our intended parents who really, I think, would benefit from having their IVF cycle done here in terms of retrieval of eggs, as Richard mentioned, they can go to this secondary country and come here. And for a certain percentage of them, we've been able to actually write support letters. And a certain percentage have been able to, with support letters that are sent then to the US Embassy, obtain a medical exemption, NIE 30-day visa, and some of those have been able to come to us. In fact, this week, for example, we have 4 couples from Europe who used that particular support letter to obtain visas to come to us directly from the European countries.
But bear in mind, that is an application to the US Embassy in the country in which you reside.
Yes.
So for example, if you're in England, you apply to the US Embassy in the UK. They'll send you back a list of 23 questions that you have to go and answer every single one. One of those actually is, are you going through a surrogacy process? So if you're trying to get in for the birth of your child. But for example, the UK is kind of working. The German Embassy is denying everybody. So it depends on which country you're in as to whether or not the national interest exemption is going to work. So don't necessarily assume that because we write you a letter, we do that you will be able to get in. Our German clients who are now doing their heterosexual couples, they're looking to do their own, use their own eggs, they're having to fly via Bermuda, Mexico, or whatever country it is.
Yeah.
No, that's
right.
great.
Yeah, there's differences between different embassies, so you're right.
Yeah, and I'm sure that could, the rules are changing as well, so it's worth keeping an eye on them. I've just got a couple of follow-up questions to particularly to what you were saying about shipping frozen sperm and frozen embryos, if that's okay. So we've had a question about whether or not sperm is, or I guess, sorry, let me rephrase this. How important is it that the frozen sperm doesn't pass through X-rays when it's being shipped? What happens if it does? Is the sperm tested when it arrives to you guys at SDFC? Is it tested at the clinic that it's provided at? Can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Absolutely. So the colleagues that we have around the world, and thankfully that's one of the reasons why we've had good relations, whether it's from collaborations with research or otherwise with colleagues around the world. And now they've been able to help us during this period of pandemic to help intended parents, transport their eggs, sperm, and embryos to us. The level of level of X-ray, essentially, the radiation levels are very low. They wouldn't have any impact on eggs or sperm, frankly. And once the sperm is frozen with the same protocols that we use in those particular countries, and once the sperm gets to us, as you know, in the majority of cases, there are millions of sperm, and we only require about, in vitro fertilization, about somewhere between 10 to 20 to 30 excellent quality sperm. So once they arrive here, there are 2 protocols by which we select out the best quality sperm, and that's actually based on research that selects out the highest quality DNA. So there's one process when we thaw the sperm called a zymote or microfluidics, where the sperm essentially goes through this obstacle course. And based on research, what the research has shown is that we can increase the quality of DNA of the sperm that finishes this obstacle course by 80%. In other words, when they compared the DNA fragmentation rates between the sperm that started that obstacle course and the ones that finished it, there was an 80% difference in DNA fragmentation. And then from those group of sperm that complete this microfluidic zymote procedure, then we take individual sperm that we select out under the microscope. Our embryologists, our biologists do that. And then from those, we take individual sperm and inject it inside the eggs. So at every level, we're inspecting the sperm and we're selecting the best quality sperm for injection inside the eggs. To give you an example of what this has led to, for example, in 2020, when we use these protocols, because ultimately intended parents and patients say, well, what has been the end result? Well, the end result has been that with the transfer of a single good quality embryo to our surrogates, the rate of pregnancy, clinical pregnancy, and also in the last couple of years, the rate of live birth has been upwards of 80%. In fact, in 2020, it was 81.5%. So we've been able to achieve those very high pregnancy rates with single embryos being transferred to surrogates. And again, we have to be meticulous, very fastidious with every aspect. The goal with eggs is to maximize egg quality that we retrieve from egg donors from our patients. And the goal from a sperm is to select out the best quality sperm based on DNA quality in order to maximize the healthy embryos, the number of healthy embryos that we transfer to the surrogate, and ultimately the creation of healthy children in the future.
And to answer another part of your question on the sperm freezing and the x-rays and all that. So the clinics that we work with around Europe and so the laboratory and our laboratory have had multiple conversations on techniques of freezing. How is it done? If a client goes into a clinic around one of the partner clinics in Europe, they will take the sperm, they'll freeze it into a number of different vials, into different plastic containers. They will test one of those to see if it froze or it didn't freeze. What then happens is when we receive that sperm, we will also thaw one to make sure that it survived. And in fact, the reason we do this is because 2 weeks ago, I had a client who went into the clinic in London. They froze the sperm, it was all fine. It looked great before the freeze. They tested one, all the sperm was dead. So they were like, oh, this isn't great. They tested another, all dead. All of his sperm was dead, which then meant that he had to go in a couple of days later to redo it. But of course, it meant that we knew up front, because can you imagine if they did the freeze, it arrives into SDFC and we're like, and there's nothing here. No. Yeah, it's a problem. So we absolutely do that. Now with certain clinics, so for example, I think the clinic in Spain, so we work with, I've just answered a question that I'll say. So we work with 2 clinics in Germany, 2 in the Czech Republic. Most clinics in the United Kingdom will do this with us. Spain, Athens, Italy, and Denmark. Okay, so we've got a number of clinics around Europe. We don't have any in France because they refuse. We don't have any in Switzerland because they've refused. We have shipped embryos from multiple clinics all over Europe. So those are the sperm freezing clinics. Embryo clinics, you can add in probably about 50 different clinics. Okay. One of the protocols that the clinic in Spain likes to do is keep one of those vials of sperm behind. They ship everything, they keep one, because if something happens to that, remember, you've already paid for the FDA testing, right? It's $900 for one person and $1,500 for 2 people that you're going to pay to have that blood and urine tested in the US. So what happens if something happens to the shipment? At least we've got some sperm that is still FDA tested. And it's the same in Italy. Now, again, we haven't had any problems, but it's a safety mechanism. And in fact, the company in Italy, the shipping company, has an insurance policy, I think pays €2,500. So if something does happen, they're going to pay for you to come back and redo the whole process. Okay, so we've really put in place mechanisms, because when we were doing this, I was sitting there going, okay, if I was recreating my family, what would get me going into a spin? Why would I all of a sudden be, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if this goes wrong? And we've tried to mitigate that where we can. Obviously, we can't unfortunately mitigate everything, but we're definitely trying.
Okay, so I have another question from people on the question on the webinar. It's a French people. If it's possible, we can answer in French, and I speak the question in French. So, cette personne voudrait savoir les différents laboratoires en Europe. Donc, nous n'avons pas la France, comme vous disiez. Comment ça se passe pour les Français et peut-être avoir une idée des freins qu'il y aura en France. Qu'est-ce qui fait que finalement, il n'y a pas de partenariat en France possible? Est-ce qu'il y en aura dans le futur? Voilà.
Non, malheureusement non. J'espère, peut-être, je sais, mais si en France en ce moment, c'est vraiment difficile pour les éthiques. Les médecins ne veulent pas nous aider. C'est comme ça. Donc, la majorité de nos clients de Paris, par exemple, ils peuvent voyager à Turin par avion, à Prague par avion, aussi en voiture à Essen. Nous avons une clinique à Essen. Donc, ça, c'est les trois avec qui nous avons travaillé la plus de Paris. Du sud de France, nous avons une clinique à La Corogne et aussi à Turin. Mais ça dépend. Par exemple, nous avons les cliniques à Londres, mais de France de France en Angleterre, vous ne pouvez pas voyager en ce moment parce que nous avons la quarantaine. Nous sommes tous en lockdown, non? Donc, ça dépendra d'où vivent les clients.
D'accord. Et justement, par rapport à ça, il y a certains parents d'intention en France qui se posent la question du prix par rapport justement à l'expédition de sperme et d'ovocytes, par exemple.
En fait, si par exemple, vous parlez de prix pendant notre premier entretien, nous allons vous revenir vers Enzo dans le département financier et il peut vous expliquer le frais. Mais si par exemple, vous comparez le frais entre la congélation de sperme et le test de FDA que nous allons faire ici chez nous, il n'y a pas une différence statistiquement ou significativement entre les deux. Nous avons collaboré avec nos confrères là en Europe pendant la dernière année avec beaucoup de succès et le frais sont pareils. Au niveau de, par exemple, la congélation de sperme, le test sanguin ici chez nous et avec nos confrères en Europe.
D'accord, donc c'est un vrai partenariat, c'est ça qui est intéressant justement.
Absolument.
Et en fait, si les clients veulent parler avec moi, j'ai tous les prix de les cliniques ici en Europe, je peux le faire. La différence, c'est que, par exemple, si le sperme s'est envoyé par FedEx, ça c'est moins cher que s'il y a quelqu'un qui l'apporte en main dans un avion. Parce que vous avez à payer le billet d'avion.
Ouais.
Donc, ça dépendra. Si c'est envoyé en personne, une couple de sperme seulement, ça coûte plus que s'il y a deux personnes, deux couples ou quatre couples dans le même tank. Donc, ça veut dire que les frais sont un petit peu variables. Les différentes cliniques sont variables. Ils chargent un coût. Nous, comme clinique, nous réduirons les prix de la clinique de SDFC. Si vous faisiez la congélation du sperme en Europe, comme nous ne faisons pas le travail, nous réduirons le prix par $1 500 total. OK? Donc, pour vous aider un petit peu. Mais je peux, s'il y a les gens qui veulent me parler en plus de ça, je peux le faire. One-to-one. C'est mieux.
D'accord. Très bien, c'est intéressant de voir comme ça où vraiment il y a des partenariats entre les différents pays justement pour soutenir dans cette crise Covid finalement. C'est ça qui...
Oui.
Ouais. Nous avons travaillé dur avec alors beaucoup d'entretiens par vidéo afin de adapter nos protocoles et d'aider pour les gens en Europe afin de continuer leur parcours chez nous.
D'accord.
And just very quickly, because somebody has reminded me that not everybody speaks French. Yes, so we work with a bunch of clinics around Europe. Each clinic has a different price, obviously, because it's not an SDFC clinic, it's a separate clinic. If you want to talk through the costings, how it works, if it's hand carried, if it's FedEx, all of those variables are going to feed into the price of what you're going to pay for the sperm freezing or the embryo shipping. As a clinic, SDFC will reduce our clinic fees by $1,500 if you're doing your sperm freeze in Europe, purely and simply because A, we're not doing the work, and B, it's not fair to double charge you. If you're paying in Europe, you shouldn't be paying in the States. So again, what we're doing is we're looking, we've really looked at this from the perspective of, if I were a client, what would I want? And so we put the mechanisms in place to try and help with that. So again, sorry for those that don't speak French. I think we were just showing off really, because Saeed and I both speak French. Oh la la, Emily in Paris. No, anyway, sorry.
As the non-French speaker, I'm very impressed. You guys have mentioned, a range of clinics that you work with, particularly in Europe. Are there clinics that you specifically work with outside of Europe, or alternatively, are there countries where you would not be able to have frozen sperm, frozen eggs, or frozen embryos shipped into the US from?
I think because of our long-standing history of collaborating with many colleagues around the world. So whether be it Australia, in Asia, in the Middle East, even I was just talking to one of my colleagues, actually WhatsApping one of my colleagues in the Middle East about freezing sperm and transporting. So I don't think there are any places that we can't find a solution for. Our commitment to our intended parents and to our patients is that we will work very hard, and we will draw up on and draw from our resources. And this is many resources. I mean, for example, I've been in practice now for 22, 23 years, and really collaborating with colleagues around the world for the last 22, 23 years. The great thing about it is that when we just had 6 papers that we presented at the American Society of Reproductive Medicine conference, 6 research papers, and there was another great opportunity to connect with colleagues. During that conference, I was able to actually connect with a nutritionist, someone who's going to be able to help our patients, our surrogates, with nutrition and all the aspects of nutrition that are important during pregnancy. So I do think that, having these collaborations and colleagues around the world is really benefits intended parents, surrogates, egg donors. And that's one of the great things about working with us in our clinic, is that you really get the benefit of all of our knowledge, all of our contacts around the world. So wherever you are in the world, we'll be able to help you. We'll find a solution for you to be able for you to advance in your journey to creating your families, because we know that's important to you.
And especially, like, you can't ship sperm currently from France, although we've just done it for one client, but that was an exception because he had testicular cancer and there was a problem. So, but we will find a solution one way or another.
Right.
We will get you that.
Great. Thanks.
Great. So we have some question about surrogates. I can ask you a question. She said, I have had a couple of friends now who have miscarried their babies in the first trimester of pregnancy after testing positive for COVID-19 and during the incubation period. Is there concern over how COVID affects pregnancy and embryo growth, particularly in the first trimester? Have there been any conclusive studies regarding pregnancy and COVID?
That's a great question. So yes, there have been many studies. In fact, studies published from Wuhan University, Columbia University in New York City, European studies that have been done. And the overwhelming data is very reassuring when it comes to COVID-19 and pregnancy for the following reasons. Number one, all the studies that have been published show no evidence for vertical transmission of the virus from the mother to the fetus during pregnancy. And then again, there have been not just one study, many studies. At Northwestern University, for example, Wuhan University. If you go to the New England Journal of Medicine, they have a COVID-19 sort of page that shows you all the latest studies on COVID-19 and pregnancy. In particular, there was a study looking at a few hundred patients who were pregnant who tested positive for COVID. And in that particular study, 88% of women who were pregnant with COVID-19 had tested positive for COVID-19, either had no symptoms or had mild symptoms. Now, if someone were to succumb to COVID and succumb to the sort of the more serious symptoms, such as high fevers, pneumonia, could that potentially increase the chance of miscarriage? Yes. But I think we have to be very careful if someone tests positive for COVID and then they also have a miscarriage, because there are many other reasons for miscarriages. You know, the most common being chromosomal abnormalities with embryos. So someone can test positive for COVID even either during the incubation or weeks after. And if they have a miscarriage, that miscarriage is not necessarily secondary to the COVID-19. There are many other reasons, the most common of which is embryonic genetic abnormalities. And even if we test embryos, you know, during the testing that we do, the PGT, PGS, the chromosome testing of embryos, there's still some other genetic abnormalities that we cannot detect at this particular point. So the data on COVID-19 and pregnancy has been very reassuring in terms of vertical transmission and in terms of patients who are pregnant who test positive for COVID, the majority of whom end up having either no symptoms or mild symptoms. And one has to remember that the group of surrogates that we work with are a group of patients who have had all the screening testing done. They're young patients who don't have any medical illnesses, don't have any pre-existing conditions. So they really have been screened as healthy patients before they're approved as a surrogate. So the risk is much, much lower. It's not zero, but its risk is much lower. And we feel comfortable. We've had some surrogates, for example, during pregnancy who've tested positive for COVID. And we have yet to have any patient, any surrogate test positive and have any severe symptoms from it or lose the pregnancy or having any effect on the fetus. So the studies are very reassuring, and I'd be happy to actually share many of those studies with you, you know, during our consultations.
So I've got a question actually which has also been asked is, should the surrogate get the COVID vaccine before the embryo transfer, or can she get it after transfer? And if it's after, how long post-transfer?
So typically the recommendation we have is that you can, if you have the opportunity to get the vaccine at any given time, take the vaccine. Now, the only time we don't want you to take the vaccine is around the time of the embryo transfer, meaning that 2 weeks leading up to the embryo transfer and 2 weeks after. For those 4 weeks around the time of the embryo transfer, and the only reason for that is not that the vaccine has any effect on the fetus or the embryo. It has to do with sometimes allergic reactions that patients can have to the vaccine. So if I'm performing an embryo transfer and a surrogate were to take a vaccine the next day and she has a side effect of fever, fever is very common with vaccinations. The increase in temperature can affect the embryo's ability to implant because embryos are very sensitive. Embryos, eggs, and sperm are sensitive to temperature fluctuations. So we're just providing a little bit of a cushion so that you're not having any rise in temperature from allergic reactions around the time of transfer, a week before, a week after, and if you want to be really cautious, maybe 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after. That's the only reason. Otherwise, if you have the opportunity to have the vaccine before falling pregnant, absolutely, take the vaccine. And if you have the opportunity during pregnancy to take the vaccine, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the United Kingdom College of Obstetricians, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, all have recommended offering the vaccine to pregnant patients. They don't believe that there's any risk. There were many patients in the studies in the Moderna and the Pfizer trials who actually didn't know they were pregnant and they had taken the vaccine, and some actually fell pregnant, you know, with the second dose. And there was going to be more studies being published, but so far we don't see any harm from the vaccines based on studies. The other interesting statistic is that just recently, just a couple of days ago, was announced and will be published as well, is that there are many countries that are way ahead in regards to vaccination of their population. For example, in Israel, roughly about 40% of the population has already been vaccinated. They looked at 128,000 of those patients who were vaccinated. And what they found was out of 128,000 who were vaccinated early and were in sort of a higher risk category, not a single one has ended up with a severe COVID-19. There were 10 who tested positive for COVID-19 out of the 128,000, but all of them were completely asymptomatic. So it's really good news in regards to the efficiency of the vaccines. And during pregnancy, if you have a surrogate who's been vaccinated, the antibodies that are generated actually can cross the placenta and cause passive immunity with the newborn. So for a certain period of time, the duration of which we're not certain at this particular time, there is going to be passive immunity of the newborn as well. So that's another added advantage. The other good news that just came out just about 24 hours ago was that we have some concerns about the South African variant of the virus, the UK variant of the virus, excuse me, Richard. But the good news is that it appears that both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are both effective against these mutated variants. So thus far, the vaccines have not decreased in efficiency, although we have to keep looking at that very carefully because the virus has a potential to mutate many, many different ways. But that's the reason why I think if the vaccination can proceed at a more rapid pace, we can also stem the tide of these new variants and mutations. Because if the virus doesn't have a chance to spread from person to person to person, it also has less of a chance to mutate. So that's why I think it's incumbent upon all of us around the world to get the vaccine, affordable vaccines to everyone. And so that should be really a priority for all governments around the world.
Okay. Jessica, if you have some questions.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's go. We have a few more questions from from our viewers. So the first one is for Dr. Daneshmand. If you're able to, could you please share a little bit more about the non-invasive testing of embryos that you discussed in your introduction?
Wonderful. That's a great question. So right now, in order to test embryos for chromosomal abnormalities such as Downs and other chromosomal copy abnormalities, we actually have to take a few cells from the embryo. And I'll show you an image of the embryo so that you can, this is a blastocyst right here, a day 5 or day 6 embryo. You have two cell types. You have the inner cell mass, and then you have the trophectoderm cells. And so what we do is we create a little opening in the shell of the embryo, and we just take 3 to 4 cells from this sort of outer edge right here. And then those 3 to 4 cells are sent to the genetics lab for chromosome analysis. It's something called next generation sequencing. They're actually sequencing the DNA. Now, in the majority of instances, this really doesn't have any impact on the embryo itself. There are a small percentage of embryos, very small, less than 5%, that could be more fragile, that could be affected by the biopsy, which means that they may stop developing. It doesn't cause an abnormal pregnancy. In order to circumvent that, what we're looking at is the embryo sheds DNA into the culture media, into the fluid where it grows. And we're taking that DNA and we're analyzing it for the same chromosomal abnormality to see if we can just circumvent the necessity of a biopsy. And what we're doing now is we're correlating the studies, meaning that we're doing the biopsy on the embryo, we're taking the culture media, analyzing the DNA, and seeing if there's a good correlation between the two. And we're close to 90% right now, but we want to get above 94, 95% correlation before we can feel very confident and comfortable that we can eliminate the biopsy and just use the culture media. So we're getting close. And so my prediction is hopefully very soon we'll be able to use the non-invasive PGTA as the method of choice. but we also have to make sure that we're confident about the results before we move in that direction. It always has to be, from research perspective, a great deal of confidence and reliability before we move in that direction.
Fascinating.
And we had another one question from a surrogate. Do we have studies about birth defects with the coronavirus and with the vaccination, if we have some papers?
No evidence of any malformations with the virus, and that's been studied. There's no evidence of vertical transmission, no evidence of malformation, and neither with the vaccine either. So we feel confident about that in regards to the effects on the fetus.
You also have to remember, it's all still very new, right? So whilst we can sit here and say the studies are doing this and the studies are that, that doesn't mean that it's, I don't want to scare people, but the vaccine hasn't been around for that long. But what we've been told and what the scientists behind it are telling us is exactly that. But
there have been other types of vaccines similar to the ones we're currently using for this pandemic. For example, very similar vaccines combating the Ebola virus. And there were many studies that were done on that particular vaccine, and the same studies and were done, and they didn't show any potential effects on fetal effects. So again, we can extrapolate from other studies that have been done. And the mechanics of the virus itself, being at least with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, they're messenger RNA vaccines. They're quickly degraded by the natural cellular processes. And so all that happens is they don't enter the nucleus. They can't enter the nucleus. They basically are entering a part of the cell that then creates the protein. So there's no nuclear DNA that's in contact with the vaccine virus. And that's one of the things I wanted to make sure that everyone knew, is that it's in the cytoplasm. The machinery of the cytoplasm of the cell then takes the messenger RNA and then creates the protein. That protein then elicits an antibody response, creates antibodies for immunity. And then that messenger RNA essentially is degraded very quickly by the natural cellular processes. So that's the mechanics of how the vaccine works. And there's even more good news to come, because Johnson & Johnson, for example, is going to be out with their results of their one-shot vaccine, one injection, one jab, as the English say, vaccine. And so far, the preliminary results on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are also very encouraging. So we're going to have now another vaccine that's going to be in the market. I think we need the more vaccines, reliable vaccines we have, the better. I know right now, for example, currently the European Union is having a tough time with AstraZeneca in terms of the supply of the vaccines for the European Union. To have enough vaccines to be able to start really a mass scale vaccination. But the more great vaccines we have out there that are safe and effective, the sooner this pandemic will be shattered.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your answers. And it's interesting to hear that and to help people to build their families with the egg donation, with the sperm donation, and with the surrogacy, because it's a difficult time for a lot of people to take decision, because they heard a lot of information on the media, on internet, on the TV. So it's interesting to have your medical point of view. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jérôme. Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be among all of you, and we look forward to helping you, create your families. All of us have had the wonderful blessing of having children and watching them grow, and so we want the same for our intended parents.
Yeah, and what is interesting, it's we work all together with agency and with fertility clinic, and if some people have other questions after, we can answer. Richard, Dr. Daneshmand, Jessica, or me. So don't hesitate to ask some question after that.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jérôme. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.